Hey everybody, how are y'all doing? I hope everybody's fared pretty well through this whole ordeal of this winter storm. I think it's a major blessing that we made it so far with no power loss. I was praying hard about that. We got snow and ice, but nothing built on the power lines. I mean, there's still snow left, quite a bit of it, but it's not too cold out here to sit out here. I was not about to sit out here and freeze in that Arctic temperatures, and I was stuck in my little tiny house with my dogs that they couldn't even go outside. They would not go outside for the snow. I had to force them to go outside to even use the bathroom. You know, they did not. They didn't want. To. So and they were, it was too noisy and it was too many distractions around here too. I mean, being cooped up with the dogs and and everybody just trying to keep warm. I was just trying to keep warm. I stayed in the bed. I've been hibernating like a bear. I told y'all I was hibernating in the winter like a bear, so I wasn't about to come out with those covers. I mean, if the Lord would have pushed me to, I would have, but He told me just wait. I told y'all that He told me that I was going to have to start slowing down. And I think that's why He was telling me, He was preparing me at a time. He was like, winter's coming. There's going to be a big storm, so, just going to have some patience and I'm ready for spring. I was ready for spring the day it first got cold. I was ready for spring in October. One of these days, Lord's going to bless me from moving somewhere warm or something. I don't know, because I can't sit out here with the birds. There's no birds. It's too cold for birds. The birds is huddled in their nest somewhere. I mean, they can't. It's not my favorite time of the year at all. Anyway, I'm here with a message. I know we left off was it 1 Samuel 5, so we're in 1 Samuel 6. So I'm going to give y'all a message for 1 Samuel 6. The snow needs to melt. Anyways. Okay, so where are we at? Also, this whole time, one thing I've been doing is every day, the more and more I see, there's so many people. A lot of people don't understand the spiritual reality that I try to talk about when I talk about this demonic stronghold, or the demonic stronghold things. When we talk about demons, we talk about the demonic. We're talking about a spiritual reality that fuels things in the physical. They're the thing behind it that is that's the spirit that's behind it that's creating these realities that exist. But the main thing is a demonic stronghold is established, especially when we talk about like a city or a community. It's established by mental mindsets. Okay, and when these people begin to develop these mindsets because of these patterns, these thought patterns that become prevalent within the community, within the atmosphere, within the environment. Okay, the things that people speak about, things that people talk about, the way people talk to each other, the way people talk about these things, they become it becomes like this psychological hold. It gets in people's minds, and it's like an infection. And it becomes this mental block, this mental lock on people's minds where they can't break free of these patterns of thought. Especially when they're fueled by things like bias and prejudice and trauma, just emotions that fuel these things. People get locked into this perception of reality, the way things work. They begin to believe that it's just the way it is. This is just how it is. And anybody that becomes mentally freed from these chains. They're chains. All these things are chains that bind them mentally to these certain mindsets. There's various mindsets. It's not just one thought pattern. It's multiple thought patterns that are negative thought patterns, not the negative thought patterns that you think exist, but the negative thought patterns that are completely opposed to biblical truth. Things like that makes people defend things like injustice because they use the law. Well, you have to follow the law. But if the law is unjust, then it's in opposition with justice. Justice is a biblical truth. God's justice is not the same as man's justice. So that's a thought pattern. It's a mental hold. It's a chain. And people will become locked into these chains, these thought patterns, and they can't break free of them because their emotions help anchor those chains. So when someone comes along and they say, this thought pattern, this demonic stronghold that has been built out of all these blocks, these mindsets, the walls that have been built by these different mental mindsets that create cages for people. And someone comes along and says, that block needs to come down. Some people push back on it because the emotions that are attached to it, they can't let go. They become encased in that block of stone. They become that stone. They can't see past the stone to the light on the other side. They've been in darkness so long that the stone wall is all they know. And the fear of reaching out and no stone being there because they can't see the light yet creates a defense mechanism, especially in the spiritual realm when the demonic is in control. They don't want you to see that light. They don't want you to see past that wall. Because on the other side of that wall is freedom. Now, on to the lesson. The glory of God's triumphant return and the dangerous cost of transactional religion. 1 Samuel 6. So in this chapter, as you know, the last chapter we was talking about how the Philistines, they took the ark captive. There was this battle, and then they divided up and they took the ark captive. Because the Israelites, was defeated because they didn't listen to God. And then, so the Philistines, they took the ark, they captured the ark, and they took it, and put it in the temple of Dagon. And God humiliated their god, Dagon, by knocking him down on his face and then chopping him up in pieces as a message. And then he plagued the Philistines with this plague, which, like I said, sometimes you'll say it was bubonic plague because there's this indication of these rats, and bubonic plague was these boils that broke out on people because of rats and stuff. So, I mean, it's a possibility it could be, but some people say it was just a bad case of hemorrhoids. Oh, it is. Well, either way, they had some kind of tumors in their nether regions. It's pretty bad, and a lot of men died. They were suffering greatly, and the Philistines said, "This God of Israel, he's something else. He got it out for us. We better get rid of him." So, we got these Philistines that they don't believe in this. They don't believe in God, but they came quick to believing in him. Believing in his power anyway. They didn't want to follow him still, but they believed in his power. So they wanted to get rid of the ark. And, as I said, they had this plague of both the tumors and the rats. Rats were in the city, and then they had these tumors, so they said that this ark has to go. So what are we going to do with it? But then they doubt. They didn't know. They said, wait a minute. But, we want to believe that it's probably because of this ark. This God of Israel is after us, and he's done this to us. But, we're not 100% sure. It could be just coincidence. But we're curious. We want to know. We got to get rid of this thing because we want to cover all our bases. We want to get rid of it just in case, but when we get rid of it, we want to know for sure whether that's what it was or not. So they decided that they're going have it. They were going to test it as they send the ark off. But their priest, the Philistine priest, and the diviners advised them that when you do send the ark away, don't turn it empty. Y'all make an offering, just in case. We want to cover our bases. If we did offend this God, we want to make sure that we make up for it. They had a little reverence for God, even though they didn't really believe in him 100%. They said, well, if he's real and we offended him, then when we send this ark back and we got to make up for what we did, so we're going to send it back with an offering. We're going to send it back in free. We're going to send it back with an offering. So they sent it back. They said we're going to send it back with trespass offering. So what they told them to do, and it's pretty funny what they told them to do. They said, we want y'all to make these gold objects in the image of your tumors and rats. we're gonna make these golden tumors, the emeralds. They made images of them in gold, out of gold. 5 of them for each of the Philistine rulers that were in on this capture of this ark. For each one of them that was accountable, was going to be held accountable. We had 5 gold tumors and 5 gold rats. We'll make these images for each one of them. And we're going to put them in with that ark when we send it back. This is our way of saying we're sorry. If this was part of their tradition, was if they thought that if they made something in the image of the plague that that had struck them, and they sent it that sending that image would then would send the plague back to the source where it came from, and remove the plague from them. So that's what they were doing. It's like we make this image of our plague that you plagued us with, and we send it back to you, and we're handing it back, and we're removing the plague by sending it back to the source that sent it. You know, it's like a form of, it was a sympathetic magic. But by offering this, they were admitting we have trespassed against this God of Israel. And we're attempting to pay a restitution fee for it. It wasn't 100% repentance. But it was something. At least they admitted he existed. And he had power. They didn't bow down before him. But they got halfway there. So then one of the most so they had this test. They set up this test though because they wanted to know whether it was really God. Or it could be a coincidence. They still had doubt. So they decided that they were going to take and put these trespass offerings on a cart with the ark and send it toward Beth Shemesh, and they was going to take these cows, and they were nursing cows. And they were going to separate them from their babies. They put the babies in the stalls. And they would take the nursing cows, and they'd never been tied to a yoke, and they didn't know how to pull a cart. So, they took the mother cows that were nursing the babies, and the natural instinct of the mothers was, if we're going to go to our babies, we're going to feed our babies. So, in a way, the Philistines thought this was a scientific test that they were performing to try to prove whether this was truly God or not. So they took these, they like I said, these mother cows, they tied them to this cart. They never pulled cart before, and they were nursing their babies, and that their natural instinct would have been to try to get to their babies instead of go anywhere else. So they said, if we do this and we tie these cows to this cart, and we put the ark on the cart, and we put the trespass offering on the cart, if these cows head toward Israel back to Beth Shemesh, then we know that's God leading them. If they go back to their babies, well, then we know that this is just all a coincidence and we don't got to worry about nothing. But if, they'll get their trespass offering back and it's no big deal. Or I don't know what they figured they would do after that. I don't know. Maybe they would figure that, they had to do something else to remove the plague or something. Or I don't know. But I'm just saying they thought they were being slick in this test. They were testing God. We're not supposed to test God, but Philistines didn't know no better to do that, so that's what they was doing. They wanted to know. Well, guess what? They did their little test, and them cows took off toward Bethshemesh, hollering. It says they were lowering. Them cows, moo, as they was going to Bethshemesh. God made sure he made some noise to let them know. As he marched them cows right on back to Bethshemesh with that ark and that trustworthy offering. And the thing about this is, when you look at this, the Israelites didn't do anything to get the ark back. They didn't lift a hand for this ark to return back to them. They didn't rescue God. Because God don't need a rescue. They didn't have to even negotiate nothing. Because it'll tell in a minute how unbothered by the fact that the ark was gone they were. Here in a minute, I'll illustrate that. So as I said, the Philistines did their little test, and you know, the ark returns, and God is he's the one that did it. He did it all. He plagued the enemy into submission until they were desperate to get rid of him. And when these cows, that God didn't need them to fight their battles. It was just like Jehoshaphat. With Jehoshaphat, he came over that hill and the army had done been defeated because God said, the battle is God's. Y'all don't have to do nothing. So these cows head back to Bethshemesh, and when they return, they wind up there with the ark. There's these men. The men are out there in the fields harvesting. It says they're out there in the fields harvesting when the ark shows up with the cart with the cows. They hadn't even amassed an army to go after the ark. And here the ark shows back up on its own. So these men see the cart and they go, oh, it's back. So they start celebrating. They have a joyous celebration. God has returned to Israel. God has returned to Israel. We're going to have a celebration. They take the cows and they kill them and they offer them as a burnt offering to the Lord. They have a big celebration. But some of the men, they forgot themselves. They forgot something. They wound up doing the same thing that the Israelites did. That the Philistines did. Trying to manage God. Especially when you don't have what you need. Or the reverence that's required. some of the men got curious, and they didn't remember that the ark wasn't just this piece of furniture or museum exhibit, something to be curious about and gawk at. But it was something, it was the footstool of the Almighty. It required reverence and a particular type of handling. As according to Numbers 4:20, it was the Levites. The Levites were forbidden from looking at the holy objects inside the tabernacle, lest they die. Even the Levites, the priests. And these men of Bethshemesh ignored this. Disobedience always. Look, remember what David did. He ignored the instructions of how to handle the ark, and the man wound up dead. And the same thing, these men of Bethshemesh did the same thing. They ignored how to handle the ark. They ignored God's instruction about how to approach Him. And they looked into the ark, and they died. There was there was not just one, there was a bunch of them. I forget how many thousand it said died in an instant. So they were celebrating because the ark returned, but they celebrated without reverence. This is because we gotta understand why they were killed like this. Why did this happen? And it happened because we have to look at what was called the Day of Atonement. And in Leviticus 16, the high priest couldn't just walk in. He had to create a buffer between himself and God's glory. And the way they did this was Aaron had to burn a specific blend of incense so that a cloud would cover the mercy seat or the lid of the ark. And it says, so that he wouldn't die, so the priest wouldn't die. And this was a type of this was sanctification through the blood. It required blood sprinkled on the mercy seat as a covering for the broken law that was kept inside the ark. But these men of Bethshemesh didn't have a cloud of incense or blood. They didn't do the proper procedure, and so they had nothing but their own curiosity. They were uncovered. They approached God uncovered. And they looked directly at the holiness of God with unveiled eyes. And because they were unsanctified, the light of God's holiness became a consuming fire. Because no man is holy enough on his own merit to look at God when sanctified. And where does our sanctification come from? It doesn't come through our own efforts. I'll explain that here in a second. So this shows us that mainly God it illustrates God's sovereignty. God doesn't need a PR team or an army to defend His glory. Just like with the battle with Jehoshaphat. The battle's not ours, it's God's. And while Israel waited, they just waited. And God ambushed the Philistines with their own guilt and fear. They were guilty, and they were fearful because they knew their guilt. That's what led them to send the ark away. And so, since this trespass offering in the law, that guilt required a trespass, or trespass required this offering to repay this debt. That's what they did. Through this, that the Philistines, even the Philistines, which were pagans, realized that sin creates a deficit that must be covered. And just how what I was talking about the covering, how we become covered, is through Christ. Because Christ is the word used in the Bible called a sham, and that means that he's the offering, he's the mediator. In Isaiah 53:10, the suffering servant Jesus is described as an sham, when his soul makes an offering for guilt. That's the sham. Just as the Philistines sent gold to pay back, Jesus offered his life to pay the debt of our sin. That's how we become covered, through his blood. That's what gives us our ability to approach God. It's through Christ, without being consumed by his holiness. While the ark brought death to those who approached it wrongly, Jesus serves as our mediator so we can approach the Father without being destroyed. In a story, we can relate this contrast between using and fearing God. This is this relational versus transactional relationship, or transactional religion type of religion. A relationship versus with God, versus this transactional form of trying to use God for our own benefit and our own purposes. Having a relationship with him as a person, versus using him as an object to fulfill our needs and our desires and our wants. The Philistines and the men of Bethshemesh both made the same mistake. They treated the presence of God as transactional. True maturity moves us from asking, what can God do for me, to how do I rightly honor who God is. No man is holy enough to stand unsanctified. Growth involves a deepening realization that we are only safe because we are in Christ. God's laws weren't meant to hide secrets. They were meant to protect the people from a power they weren't equipped to handle. So this teaching in 1 Samuel 6 reveals that while God is our protector, he is not our peer. It explores the tension between his independent victory and the reverence he demands from his people. The ark's return proves that God fights his own battles. Without an Israelite army, he ambushed the Philistines through their own nature and conscience. By making unyoked cows leave their calves to carry the ark, God showed he is the master of creation who returns to his people by his own power. The Philistines' trespass offering was a desperate restitution fee to cover their sin. This points to Isaiah 53:10, where Jesus becomes our ultimate sham. While the Philistines offered gold to stop a physical plague, Jesus offered his soul to stop the spiritual plague of death. The danger of transactional religion. The tragedy at Bethshemesh reveals the fatal cost of casual religion. Under the law of Yom Kippur, access to God required a buffer of incense and the covering of blood. Without these, the men of Bethshemesh were struck down, proving that no man is holy enough to stand unsanctified. We are only safe in God's presence because we are clothed in Christ. One thing that's worth noting here is that the Philistines, they recognized this this need to offer this trespass offering. The Israelites, they should have known better. They thought that when they did that, what they did was looking in the ark. They knew better, but the Philistines didn't know no better. They were doing what they were just trying to figure it out as they went. But the Israelites already knew, which makes it worse on them. So this, this approaching God without reverence is a dangerous combination. The Philistines' ignorant wasn't an excuse, but the Israelites was worse off for knowing better and still doing wrong. The bottom line here is that even when we celebrate God's triumphant return, we must respect His dangerous holiness. We cannot manage the Almighty. We must submit to Him. In this next chapter, we're going to move from, there's going to be this narrative shift where the ark is moved to another, from Bethshemesh to this Kiriath and Hiram, because it's going to move from where this illustration of God's dangerous holiness to the spiritual revival of the nation, and that's what we'll go through next time. But as I said, both the Philistines and the Israelites. The Israelites were God's people, but they were in the same boat with the Philistines because they did the same things. They thought they could manage God, and they didn't have enough reverence for Him. Even though they knew they needed to wait on Him, and He would fight His own battles, and they were just going about their business, waiting on God to come back. They lost their reverence in the process. Ain't that kind of like the church? We're all sitting around waiting on the Lord to return. A lot of us has lost our reverence in the process. You lose your reverence. You lose your covering. Don't forget the who. Focusing on the what. I love y'all.